All right. Good morning, everyone. We'll wait another minute or so. It's great to be here, back here in TBI. Those of you who registered before Friday afternoon received some detailed instructions from me about how to prep, but we'll go through those again. And once we get started. Do you want to tell me who's here?
The names I see are Shirley Schiffman.
Shirley.
And David Strutton, and Maxine Proskorowski, and Martha McRitchie, and Liz Siegel, and Kel Weinhall, and Amy Chinitz, and Randy Bernstein, and Mindy Schiffberg, and Zechariah Moses, Deborah Gelzer, Sandy Alperin, Gretchen Lieberman, Geraldine Moreno, Anita.
All right.
Yes.
So some people from my previous classes and some new folks too. And we're not in a rush so that I will be able to take questions as we go along. I guess we will start, and let's begin with a Shehechianu for being together in this different way, and for having gotten through a lovely Hanukkah, particularly for Linda and I, for having completed our more than 2-week road trip to get here, to be with our family and this wonderful community. So please join me in a Shehechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. So I'm wearing my Ducks shirt in honor of the yesterday's victory, upset victory in the Pac-12, but I'm going to put my apron on now. And I have followed the instructions I sent out. Following those instructions, I have prepped ahead of time my warm liquid, and I'm making 2 batches here. This is a vegan batch. So I'm using a plant-based butter called Melt. And then this will be a regular dairy batch, although I didn't have any dairy milk, so I'm using soy milk in both batches. So the vegan batch has my egg substitute, which is flaxseed soaked in water, according to the recipe. And I have in the bowl all the dry ingredients mixed together. That's the sugar, the salt, the cinnamon, and the cardamom. And I have my instant yeast mixed in here. But if you are using active dry yeast, that should have been dissolved already a few minutes ago and ready to go in the bowl. And I have my warm liquid, I think I said that. And my eggs for the non-vegan recipe. And I'm just going to start mixing. So I will take my warm liquid, put it in there with the dry ingredients. Mix this up a little bit to get started. And I only have 1 cup of flour to start with because we want to get that yeast soaked in a nice wet mixture before it gets too dry. And I'll do the vegan batch over here. With the egg substitute. No, I didn't. And then I will get the eggs in here. And I will pause now to see where people are at and take any questions that you have. So I'm working on 2 batches at once. Get all this out of the way, hopefully off camera. And here I've got my melted butter for the,
Question from Mindy.
Yeah.
What all should be in the bowl now?
okay, you can have in the bowl now your 1 cup of flour.
Okay, in the directions it says, another question.
Go ahead.
In the directions it says to mix in 2 cups of flour.
2 cups of flour is fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Can you confirm the total quantity of active dry yeast?
It is 2 packages or a packet of commercial yeast that is sold in the stores is 2 1/4 teaspoons. So that is 4 1/2 teaspoons or 2 packets. And 4 1/2 teaspoons also happens to equal 1 1/2 tablespoons. And that active dry yeast should be dissolved in warm water with some sugar beforehand. But if you haven't done that and you just need to mix the active dry yeast in with the dry ingredients or with what you have so far, it will still work as long as the liquid is a little bit warm. The yeast needs warmth to activate it.
So right now in your bowl, what's everything that's in your bowl?
Right now, what I have in my bowl is, let's be consistent, and we'll say 2 cups of flour.
Are you, right now you're adding?
I'm adding the 2nd cup of flour.
7.
Yep, that's fine. So I've got 2 cups of flour. I have my 1/2 cup of sugar. I have my yeast. I have the liquid, whether it's water or milk or some combination of both, or soy milk or other substitute. In this one, I added the butter. I've got the cardamom, the cinnamon, and the salt. And the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add the plant-based butter here. It is so soft from being at room temperature overnight that this doesn't need to be melted. So that will mix right in. And finally, I'm going to add the vanilla, and I'll go over it one more time. A 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla.
Are there eggs in there now?
The eggs are in. The eggs are in, and the egg substitute is in the other one, and the vanilla. Now, I have everything, and I'm going to double check. Liquid, yeast, sugar, 2 cups of flour, salt, vanilla, cinnamon, cardamom, eggs, and butter or butter substitute, except for the rest of the flour. So I can move everything out of the way, just have my flour here. And we're going to add the flour 1 cup at a time. And we're going to not necessarily add 3 more cups of flour to make exactly 5 cups. We're going to make the amount of flour we need for this dough to feel right. Because babka is basically a bread, since it has yeast in it. And a bread dough is done when, based on all of the ambient conditions and of course, the ingredients, when it feels right. And babka dough is we especially want to have a very soft and supple dough So I'm going to add 1 more cup of flour. And you see it's still quite wet, but this is going to become a dough that is dry enough so that we can shape it with our hands without having sticky dough on our hands. It'll be a nice, firm but soft dough. So I've got 3 cups in each one. And I invite you to unmute yourselves if you can to ask questions or to put them in the chat. You see the chat?
I do in the chat.
Okay.
People are unmuted and they can unmute themselves.
Now, when we're mixing bread dough, you don't have to worry about lumps. You don't have to mix it so well that it's smooth. It's not a cake batter. So I've got some lumps in here, but I don't see any dry flour on the surface. That means the flour is all mixed in both cases. And it's time, when I don't see any more dry flour on the surface, to add some more flour. So I think this is my 4th cup in each one. Roll up my sleeves. By the way, I want to thank Nina for being here on a precious Sunday to help us do this. We'll see if we can figure, some little treat that we might be able to leave for Nina at the end of the day.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Getting to the 4th cup here. How are people doing? Still very shaggy, which is just how it should be. This is the vegan one. So I'm going to take my measuring cup.
Zechariah just put in the chat that he's done.
He's done. All right. Can Zechariah show us his ball of dough?
He spotlighted. Zev, that looks nice.
Can I see? Good job, Zev. All right, I'm only going to put a 1/2 cup more in.
Okay, you got a question from
To
Tracy
start,
Kessler.
yep.
Oops, it just disappeared. I saw it and then I can't anymore.
But she can, maybe it was a range. I would say this is going to be from between 4.5 and 5.5 cups total, because not everybody measures. Okay.
Tracy said, I wasn't careful when reading the directions and added all of the sugar to the milk yeast mixture. Should I throw it away?
No, it's fine. It'll be fine.
From Deborah Glazer. Tracy Kessler said, thank you. And Deborah Glazer just said, I prepared both fillings. Will there be enough mixture for 2 pans?
You already prepared the fillings? There should be. You can always make more if you need it. It's, I was gonna do the fillings at the 2nd session, but and I was gonna give the instructions for that, or go over that when we're finished mixing the dough. But that should be fine. The thing about, well, I'll talk about the filling. Now I've only got 4.5 cups in here. And I'm going to finish this dough before I finish the vegan dough, just not to cross-contaminate. And I like to make a very, very soft babka dough because it can even be a little bit sticky, because later on after it rises, when we roll it out, we're going to be using flour to roll it out. So it will take more flour. I am going to add a little bit more, but probably not the full 5 cups at this point. But by the end of the process, after we've rolled it out, later on, it'll probably be close to 5 cups. Or maybe it's pretty close to 5 cups right now. All right, I'm going to take it out of the bowl.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
On the butter, like, should I err more on the side of not very melted or too melted?
Sorry, not very what?
On the butter, would it be worse to have it too melted or not enough, or not soft enough?
You know, if it's soft, you're mixing it into the dough, or is this for the filling?
This is for the dough. I'm behind. So, and I just took it out of the fridge. So I'm like,
I would melt it. Yeah, you can't over melt it, but you have to.
okay, that's what I was wondering. So
You can't put super hot butter into the recipe, especially if you're using active dry yeast. You might kill the yeast, in fact. So I would say partially melt it and swirl it around a little bit. It won't be that hot, and then it'll all mix right in.
perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. And this dough is done, even though I have a little bit under 5 cups of flour in, and it's very soft. I really like the way this dough feels. And if you can visualize this, we're basically going to cut this into pieces, roll them out, and we're going to be needing to add flour as we roll the dough out to get it as thin as we want it to be. So it will become a little stiffer during the next stage. So I'm going to wash my hands and finish the vegan dough. Get all this good stuff. You can see how clean my bowl is. I have no sticky stuff in there. Get that little bit of flour rolled up. And so if you're not kneading yet, here's a couple of tips on kneading. And even though the dough's done, I'm just going to knead it for a couple more minutes because I like doing it. Feels good. It's like playing in the mud, or being a way of being connected to the earth, because of course everything that's in here is some element that comes from the earth, and we human beings get to put these together, take the gifts that the earth, that God gave us, and somebody figured out how to combine these things to make bread. Beautiful thing. And this is as close to a perfect dough. A lot of times I just won't be paying attention and I'll add too much dough. There it is. I'm going to cover that with some plastic wrap. What, honey? We're going to create a nice little warm environment. It's actually kind of chilly in the kitchen here at TBI. We opened up a window to get some fresh air. But what is rising? Rising is yeast, which is a fungus, consuming its fuel, which is not just the added sugar, the sugar that we added, but the natural sugars in the flour. The yeast is consuming that, and like every living organism, it produces gas and expels that gas. And that is bread rising.
Nina just sent a message.
Yeah.
The oven pilots are on and it could rise from there.
Okay.
I want a slightly warmer environment.
Yeah. Well, I may do that, but because I've sealed this, now this is why I prefer, a lot of bread recipes say cover with a damp cloth. Oh, I have to wash up, finish the vegan dough. And covering with a damp cloth works on a warm day, but I like to use a nice plastic sealed environment on a cold day because what does that gas produce? That the yeast munching on the sugars produces gas. It produces warmth. So we're creating our own little proofing space, our own little warm environment in a bowl that's sealed like this. But you can cover it with a plate. You can cover it with a dish towel, a damp dish towel. If you're in a warm environment, and it will definitely rise if the yeast is good. All right, let me finish up the vegan batch. And just let's have a check-in, see how people are doing. You can, if you've finished your ball of dough, you can hold it up for us to see it. This is the 5th. Actually, I kind of lost track here. I think it's the 5th. But like I said, I'm going to add as much flour as it takes to feel right.
Had a question in the chat. Just realized I forgot the vanilla. Can I add it now?
It depends on how far along are you. If your dough is done, I wouldn't bother, and it'll be very, very delicious without the vanilla. If your dough is not done and you have quite a bit of mixing to do and kneading to do, let's say you only have 3.5 or 4 cups of flour in, yeah, I would sprinkle it around and then mix it in, knead it in. It might not mix in completely thoroughly. You might even see streaks of it, but that'll be fine. Getting all the. Another thing that I don't find necessary that a lot of recipes call for is when you finish the dough and put it back in the bowl, often it says grease the bowl, with butter or with oil or with spray. I find that to be an unnecessary step, especially if the bowl is really clean like this. Taking it out, putting it on the counter. Flour there to get this out. And I'm just putting some dry flour in the bowl and kind of cleaning the bowl with the flour to get the sticky dough parts out. Now, what I said about not needing oil to grease the bowl, you certainly can, but the trick to not using oil is to have a tool. After the dough rises, it is going to stick to the bowl, but have a tool, a scraper or a spatula or something to get all that, help you get all that dough out. Because it's not just going to tumble out like it would if it was greased. I think we have one of those white dough scrapers here that we'll use later on. So this is taking a little more flour. I really don't know why. Doesn't matter. And this, I don't remember where I found this babka recipe. And as I said with my challah class, what I say with my challah classes, I'm not particularly promoting any particular dough recipe. Like the challah that I make is on the less sweet side. It's on the less cakey side. There's challah recipes, there's babka recipes. that have sour cream in them, that are even richer than this one, which is full of butter and sugar, that are less sweet, that are more sweet. I'm interested in giving you the technique to be able to feel what the dough should feel like, and then you can play around with different recipes. You can make it sweeter, you can make it less sweet, you can add different spices if you want. All right, this is just about done. And you can see that now you can see that even though it's quite a sticky dough, I think you can see that, as I'm kneading it, this is pretty sticky. Actually, I'm going to add a little more flour. But I'm kneading it, and this is kind of an advanced kneading technique where I'm really almost tossing the dough, and it's not spending that much time in contact with the surface of the counter, of the table. Because if I were pushing it like this, then it's going to stick. If I leave it like that, there, see, it's sticking. But if I'm continually moving it, it's not sticking. And this is even softer than the other dough. But I'm not going to worry about it, as I said, because we're going to use quite a bit of flour when we're rolling it out later. And as soon as I get this covered, we'll start talking about the next step. And I don't think I'm going to put it in the oven because I have a full hour till 12, and that's plenty of time. If I were in a little bit of a rush and needed it to rise a little faster, I might put it in the oven with just the pilot on, which is actually a good idea if you need to create a bit of a warm environment. Or you know what, I think maybe I'll put one in just to experiment. Oh, it's actually, it's too warm. I can feel those racks are pretty warm to the touch, and I don't need anything that warm. So how are people doing? Tell me where to look. I want to give some instructions on preparing for the next step. I'm going to be showing at least 4 different things to do with this dough. And what you do with the dough depends on what kind of vehicles you have in your kitchen. That is to say, what kind of pans. If you have loaf pans, if you have muffin tins, you have a sheet pan. If you have a bundt pan, I would recommend getting out a bundt pan. And I'll show you how to use all these things. And if you don't have any of those things, and you only have a flat sheet pan or a cookie sheet, that's fine too. There's different shapes we're going to do. Everything that we're doing, though, is going to be based on the technique of rolling as thin as we can get it, and filling that, and then rolling it up in different ways or shaping it in different ways. Now, if you've ever gotten a commercial babka from a deli, it has very thin spirals with the chocolate filling or the cinnamon filling. And we're not going to achieve that because those are done with a commercial piece of equipment called a sheeter, where you feed the the dough, pre-measured amount of dough into this machine, and there can be huge machines if it's a big commercial operation, and it makes the dough extremely thin, so that when you roll it up, it's a lot denser. We're going to roll it as thin as we can with rolling pins. Or if you don't have a rolling pin, you can use a wine bottle or a vinegar bottle, or and if we don't have that, you can use your hands. It just won't be as thin. I'll show you how to do it with your hands.
Never
Yes.
The wood stove that has been cooling this morning worked for plenty of hours.
My only concern would be that you're actually going to start baking the dough rather than just creating a warm environment. It should be below 100 degrees. Ideally, like in the 80s or 90s would be a good temperature if you can see. Above that, you're actually going to start cooking it, and that's not going to be good for our purposes. I've made that mistake.
Okay. The sound-
Now, so for the next stage, then we'll close for now, unless people have other questions. What I'm going to do is. All right. This should be better. Okay. I'm going to prepare 2 bowls of filling. A bowl like this.
The microphone fell off.
It fell
I
off.
just found it.
And it's going to have, according to the recipe, the proportion is 2-to-1 sugar and butter, or sugar and shortening. And according to my recipe, it's 3/4 cup of butter and 1.5 cups sugar. So that's twice as much sugar as butter. And then one of them is going to have cinnamon added to it, and the other is going to have cocoa powder added to it. Now, what I've found with these 2 fillings is that the cinnamon filling works fine, and it spreads easily. The cocoa filling, for some reason, hardens up after a while and gets harder to spread. So I add the cocoa at the last minute to my warm or hot sugar and butter, or sugar and shortening, right before I spread it. The other I don't worry about so much, as long as it's fairly warm. Yes.
Question from Randy Burt regarding the filling. Is each filling recipe meant to fill all 3 babkas?
You know, that's a really good question. Well, first of all, I'm going to suggest you're not going to make 3 babkas, because you're going to want to do one of these other things, and I'll tell you what they are. So you don't need 3 loaf pans. I think that that's enough. If you only make the chocolate filling, that's enough for 3 babkas. That's enough for this recipe. Or if you only make the other. So you could start by trying to make, if you want to make both, make half of both, or use the proportion of, let's say, 1/2 cup of butter and 1 cup of sugar, which would be a little more filling, just to make sure. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? But to be honest with you, I don't remember. It's a really good question. We will find out after today. And also, this is...
Usually when you're making this, you're making much larger quantities.
Yeah, I do this. Yeah. This is the first time I've done a babka class remotely. So usually we're all together around this space and we're doing this together, and then it's easier to make a little bit more or a little bit less. Now, I will tell you this, and this is important. When the time comes to spread the filling on the dough, you're going to want to spread it quite thinly, even though, especially if you have like 8-year-olds with you, you kind of want to really pile it on there because it's so yummy. But think about this, that the dough is going to rise again, and the heavier just really in terms of mass or volume, the more filling you have, the longer it's going to take to rise, because it's weighing the dough down, so to speak. And also because there are going to be multiple layers. It is going to be spiraled. It is going to be folded or rolled. You can have a thin layer of filling, and it's still going to be full of this filling. The other thing is, for the chocolate filling, we use the sugar and cocoa mixture and butter, and we use chocolate chips, which again, you don't want a super thick layer of chocolate chips. It's just going to weigh it down. You want to spread them kind of lightly, but they will be, it's called laminated, because this is a lamination process when we have different layers like this. So there'll be plenty of filling. Now, I would say have your fillings mixed up when we're ready to start at noon, and we'll be in good shape. You don't have to do it now. They'll cool too much. You may have to reheat them. But if you do them, let's say 15 minutes to noon, we'll be in good shape to start. What? No, don't add the cocoa. We'll add the cocoa. And let me say a couple of other things actually I didn't put on here. One of the things that I'm going to be making is either in this, actually I think I will make some in here too, are sticky buns. And what you want to do if you want to have sticky buns is take a square pan. It can be a round, it could be a pie pan. And this is going to be a slightly different filling. If you have brown sugar, mix up, really, I don't have the exact, here's what I would do. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take some butter, and I'm going to grease these with the butter. I'm going to leave extra butter in the bottom. I'm going to sprinkle some brown sugar on it, and maybe about half a tablespoon or 2 teaspoons of maple syrup. I'm actually not going to measure. I'm just going to go like this with the maple syrup, okay? A splash of maple syrup. And then I'm going to lay in some pecan halves at the bottom. Then raw pecan halves. Raw pecan halves. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Then I'm going to show you how to make a sheet of dough, fill it with the cinnamon pecan filling, raisins if you want, and then we slice them into rounds about this big, maybe a ½ inch thick, and put them in there, and these are going to be sticky buns. And at the end, we turn them over, and that pecan, maple, brown sugar is on top, okay? The other thing I will say, let me talk about nuts for a second. These are my pecans for the filling, and these are toasted. I always like to use toasted nuts if it's going to go inside the dough, in a filling of the dough, because nuts that are in the interior of the dough when they bake are not going to get toasted. But nuts that are on the surface, the bottom surface of the pan, will get toasted. So I use raw nuts. If you're using nuts as a topping, you want to use raw nuts. But anything that's going on the interior of the dough, whether you're just mixing it in with the dough or laminating it like we're going to be doing, I prefer toasted. That doesn't mean that everybody prefers that. Certain nuts like walnuts, you don't really need to toast. But I find that the toasting really brings out the flavor, especially of pecans, almonds, peanuts if you're going to use them. So,
I have a question.
yes.
Should the butter be melted for the filling or just
Yes.
very soft?
You definitely want to use melted butter for the filling because you're going to be mixing in the sugar, and it needs to be fairly liquidy, Shirley, to spread it. If it's a really thick filling, it's just harder to spread. That's the only reason. It's certainly doable.
One other question. I have some topping that I had over from making something the other day. Could I use that? It's butter and brown sugar, and cinnamon.
It's like a streusel topping. Yes,
Yeah.
that'll be very good. But I'm going to show you a technique where it's going to look really beautiful without needing a topping, but absolutely you could put a topping on it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Now we've only been talking
I had a
for
question.
Yes.
The question about the toasting of the nuts. I just have raw pecan halves, and I was going to toast them. Should I like just toast them in a pan? Is what I was thinking. Should I chop them up beforehand, or does it matter?
I find it easier to once they're toasted and cooled, I just break them up with my hands, and I have very coarse pieces. That's how I like it.
Okay.
And they're easier to break up when they're toasted because they're more brittle.
Okay.
Oh,
Thanks.
Can you identify yourself?
This
Who
is
asked the
Jess.
question?
Jess Lambright.
Okay, great. Other questions? Let's take a look at our dough. And it's already risen a little bit. And I'm going to just be confident and trusting that in 50 minutes, it will be ready. And yeah. Okay. So unless there's other questions, we will see you around noon. Thank you so much, everybody.